An insight-oriented organization is one in which the use and the need for insights and information are driven by those who use or benefit from the insights rather than by those who develop or provide them. There are three key ideas that motivate what it means to be one. Drawing insights from data is a form of innovation. Providing access to insights is not the same thing as leveraging or consuming insights. And knowing about insights is not the same as the willingness to leverage insights. Now, much of the discourse around insights today focuses on the ability to use information. This is data literacy, the skill sets and the tools that can be solved primarily by training and investment. This is actually very straightforward in the grand scheme of things. However, if it's data culture you're after, it requires the willingness to use data, which depends on the appetite and the trust by the users to make decisions with information. From the perspective of the person making the decision, both the so what and the what's in it for me have to be addressed. An insight-oriented organization has both the ability and the willingness to make decisions using insights. Unfortunately, the current prevailing approach is to try to develop culture almost purely through literacy and therefore training, especially technical training. It may work up to a point, but the knowledge of methodologies and techniques does not guarantee appetite or confidence in the information. The fact that a person can code in Python does not mean that he or she will want to make decisions using insights. To illustrate this, we'll consider a few scenarios. When an organization has the ability and the willingness for the provision as well as for the consumption of insights, it's ready to be insight-oriented. There's a way to provide the insights, and people can and want to make decisions using the insights. An organization could completely lack the ability in the provision, but have the ability and the willingness to consume. This organization only has to figure out how to arrange for the provision of insights. It could acquire that capability, train its employees, or even outsource that capability almost entirely. An organization may not even have the ability to consume, but as long as there is a willingness to consume, how to consume is simply a matter of training. Each of these scenarios has a clear path to becoming insight-oriented. What do they have in common? The willingness to consume. Unfortunately, this last scenario is way too common. These organizations have all the capabilities, but not the willingness to consume insights. So they end up producing insights that no one wants. A good chunk of the 60 to 70% falling short is attributed to the scenario. Some of these organizations even have impressive capabilities in advanced analytics, but still struggle with the ROI from data because they lack that consumer culture. Essentially, you have an oversupply of insights. The market is flooded. An organization is a market or an ecosystem in which the insights are the products to be consumed, and the consumption in turn produces value to the organization. The key then is to increase the demand, and since the demand is what leads to value, it really becomes an exercise in how to cultivate the willingness to consume. Then once you start to get a little more demand than the available supply, that creates a pull for more insights. As I mentioned, the provision of insights is much more straightforward to address, so we can regulate that pretty quickly. This market or ecosystem has three components. First, the appetite for insights. Without the appetite, consumption is not sustainable. It can be useful to consider some models of demand generation, the sense of need, then awareness, of which training is only a part, then interest, and finally action. Second, the trust in information. If nobody trusts the insights, no amount of appetite will lead to consumption. And third, the effectiveness, not just the efficiency of the provision of insights. An ineffective supply blocks consumption. It might surprise you how feasible it is to outsource the production of insights. Sure, there are competitive and other IP concerns which will need to be considered. For provision, the organization only has to have access to production. But it's impossible to outsource the consumption of insights. access to consumption makes no sense. Either you consume or you don't. But this consumption is what makes an organization insight-oriented. Many make the mistake of acquiring production capability without developing consumption, in part because they kind of fall in love with the idea of producing insights, in part because production is much more tangible and straightforward to address than consumption, and in part because they don't realize the criticality of consumption. To develop this ecosystem, we need to address the following aspects. The organizational infrastructure that fosters an insight-oriented culture. This includes the functional structure and the business processes. The programs and the methodologies that develop and maintain key tasks and standards. And finally, the capabilities of the resources. Organizations are often configured to produce insights and make them available, but not necessarily designed to derive value from insights. Value is not a natural consequence of the availability, so you need the design to support it. The most critical component of the organizational infrastructure is people. Nothing happens without people. People turn everything into reality, even something as technical as data and analytics. It includes the organizational structure, the functions, the roles, the responsibilities, the skill sets, the availability of the resources, among others. The second is process. They are different from the procedures that explain a task step by step. Rather, they are the business processes with various actors across functions. Well-designed processes facilitate decisions and reduce or even eliminate silos by defining collaboration protocols. The third is technology. Oddly enough, this is the most straightforward. Not necessarily easy, maybe not necessarily cheap, but straightforward. And which specific tools to use are really not that critical. And all of this exists in the context of the business. No technology transforms an organization. Rather, it's the processes and the people carrying out these processes that make a transformation happen. Unfortunately, it's easier to think technology because it's more tangible, the tools, the platforms, etc. The all too common mistake is starting with technology. In these cases, the process the technology is intended to support is either misaligned or non-existent, and people do not appreciate the reasons for the technology. In fact, the technology aspect of this is almost always more complicated than necessary. In an insight-oriented organization, technology simply empowers people and makes the process easier. It allows us to improve what we already do. It does not define what we do. The organizational infrastructure can foster or prevent an insight-oriented culture because it sets the norms for the people. It's a system in which the employees work. Successful organizations focus on that first. And when that is in place, the programs and the methodologies and the skill sets are relatively straightforward to address. Often many of the tools and resources already exist, but the system is not designed to support these capabilities and defeats the employees within. As Deming said, a bad system will beat a good person every time.